All right. So today we are going to learn about React Router. Um, React Router is super useful. It's going to solve a problem for us that we didn't know we had with our app, which is if I've got a basic React app running here with my dev server and there's nothing fancy going on. Um, I can do all these various things, but what if I want to have different pages, like a home page or an about page? Um, if I go, to Wikipedia and I search for cats, we see there's a page here for cat, there's a page here for dog, and other websites, there's even more levels of nesting, more slashes that happen with different pages. I'm sure you all have also seen, there's sign up and like a user profile page. And then, if I want to share this page about dogs to a friend, I can copy this link and share it with someone and open a new tab in the browser. And based on this part of the URL, after what's called the base of the URL, our host, it'll fetch this information dog. And in React, where we have JavaScript running in the browser, remember, and we have components, I actually need to control the sort of default behavior of the browser here because the way that things used to work is on Wikipedia, back in the day, for this page on dogs, there would be an actual HTML file with all of this text and image assets and everything. But with React, we don't have that anymore because my different pages are going to be in my front end. And in fact, let's make a directory called pages. And let me go into our project. And just to make a really simple example here, we might have a home page. And it's not going to do much. It's going to have a div. And maybe at some point we'll make a page class in CSS and it'll have an H2 element and it'll say home page and there would be some information. And maybe, we have some JavaScript that does stuff. And instead of an HTML page that the server fetches and returns to the browser, this JavaScript code is actually running here. At least that's my goal, right? Because I know that I could import this home page and I've made a simple footer and a simple nav bar. And I've added, let's add, in fact, a little bit of CSS here. Let's make a nav bar class that's going to have a background color of red and a footer class that's going to have a background color of green. And let's have our page class have a border of 2px solid black. And I could import these components as we've learned to know and love into my React app. And maybe I want to put my nav bar up here. And I want to put my footer down here. And I need to import the footer. And that ought to do it. And I want my home page here. And let's import the home page as well. And this logic here with the button and the counting and the clicking, we can leave it here for now. But now the challenge is, first of all, I still don't have any front-end routing, right? It doesn't matter what URL I put in here. And what if I want to show different pages? So these are the kinds of problems that React Router was created to solve. So we've kind of covered like React Router and why use it, and I've talked a little bit about front-end routing, right? So we need it for front-end routing. So pages can have URLs that we can share. And to make it easier to organize my React app. We're going to talk about going through installing it. And while this is not related to installation, step one was we create a source pages directory, the whole different pages. And we'll see how to make some simple routes, and we'll add a home page and probably adding an about page. And along the way, we will talk a little bit about the outlet component, which just file that name away. We'll see it in a little bit when we get to multiple pages. There's a lot of different routing libraries. React Router is one of many different options. And if we take a quick look at their site, we can see all of these different jargon, user obsessed, standards focused, multi-strategy router. They actually just released version 7, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The important thing is that version 7 is a non-breaking upgrade. Most of our examples use version 6, and so that's sort of the code that I'll be showing you all, and it will all work just fine in version 7. And if we go to their docs, their docs actually in the version 7 docs, I think, get a little confusing. I would actually recommend just going to the version 6 docs and starting from here. So, you know, we are installing latest version of React Router, version 7. But the V6 docs are going to be easier to read. And our examples won't use the latest and greatest version 7 features, which is totally fine for learning purposes. And what we'll also see with React Router is React Router has many ways to do the same thing. So we're going to show you one way, but as you see more and more code, you'll see there's other ways that accomplish the same task. Right, so this is just sort of maybe some background. So now let's get into actual installation steps. And the good news here is it's pretty straightforward. And in fact, if we go to their tutorial and their setup, there's some ways to do this with Vite. Like if we pass a React template, to be honest, I find just installing React Router DOM to be the simplest way to do it. So I just run npm install React Router DOM. And now I see that this has been added to my package.json, which we know and love over here. And we see it's version 7.9. And we have these installation steps in our curriculum, and I would just use this as your install guide for the moment over the documentation, actually. And so we've created a pages directory that we'll use later. We've installed React Router DOM. Now we actually need to create what's called a router object. And I'm going to go ahead and write this code, and then we'll look at the docs and talk about it a little bit, and then we'll put it into action. So inside my source directory, I'm going to make a file named router.jsx. And we're going to do a couple things in here. We're going to import a function called create browser router that comes from React Router DOM. I'm going to import my main app component. And really, for the moment, that's it. and we'll add a bit more to this as we go. So now I'm going to create what's called the router object. And this configures the different front-end routes. So for example, slash, we'll go to our app, or it will soon go to our homepage. And to do this, I call this create browser router function. And as it says here, it creates a React router, and we pass in these different objects. And just briefly, I'm going to pull up the React router docs so we can see this create browser router. So this is going to do a lot of things for us. It's actually going to interact with the browser and with the browser DOM's history API that we haven't talked a lot about, but you can actually use JavaScript in the browser to look at all the different places that we've navigated to. And that's what's actually happening when I hit the back and forward buttons. So if I do like window history, we see it's actually this array that has 3 things inside of it. I think it's window history back. And let me call the function. We actually can go back in the browser history. And if I do window history forward, we can go forward in the browser history. And so the same way I can write this JavaScript code to actually drive the browser like this, React Router does this as well. And this is part of what create browser router does for us. And then inside it, we're passing this array that's going to have a bunch of different objects. And these objects are what's called route objects. And we'll kind of talk through and break down what each of these does. So during create browser router, I'm passing in an array. And for the moment, my array is just going to have one object. And this object has to have a certain shape. It's got to have a property called path. And it's got to have a property called element. And I'll talk in a minute about children. Right now, we'll just start with these two, and we'll kind of see where we go from here. I'm going to go ahead and export this as a default export. And we now actually have to go to our main JSX, because up until now, we've been using this app component, right? And to do a little TL drawing, my React app might look something like this, where I have app, and then inside here, I may have other components. For instance, I had my nav bar and my footer. And my homepage. Whoop, let's see if we can. There we go. What's going to happen now, though, with React Router is a little different. And in fact, then an app was inside this main, right? And what's going to happen now is, rather than all this stuff being in main. And let's actually just get rid of these things here. We're going to be using the React router provider. And React router will render components for us inside main based on our routing rules. So let's go ahead and write this code and see this in action. And I'll just pull up this guide code here for us to see as we kind of walk through it. So I need to do a little bit of importing. We're going to import router provider from the React router DOM library. And we're going to import our router object that has our different routes. And instead of app here, we're now using this router provider component that does a whole bunch of stuff under the hood. And I need to give it my routing logic that I created. Right, and if we do a split here, let's put the routes up here. So you guys can see the routes here. And we can see here the router provider. And let me restart my dev server, and it looks like I have a typo. So let's fix that typo. And let's restart our dev server. And now we see something really interesting. First of all, if I look at React DevTools, this component tree is really interesting. And there's this router provider component and all these other sort of providers and React router things happening inside of it. But we're seeing an error message for this route / home. Because if I look at my routing logic up here, there is no path or route. Right, so this is the path or route the component renders at. And so if I change this from home to just /, I see my app component. And if instead of our sort of base route here, I had just some random route like foobar, we would see, again, there's an error because React router doesn't have a route object for that path. So we get its default error component. But now if I go to the route foobar, we see again our app component, what they call the element, the JSX element being rendered. So I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have and what people are curious about. Rick, yes, sir.
Yeah, is there a way to have it like if you type the address, there's a default page that it goes to. Does the router do that?
I think the way to do that would be you do have to have a path that's just a / to the base route, which I think is what you're saying, right? If I just want.
I think you're muted.
Well,
Oh, I am muted. Is this what you're asking about, Rick? Where if I just want the host name or domain name that my server is running on, and we're just going to the base route, that's just the / here, and you know, like if I shared a link to my app with someone else and said, hey, check this out, you could copy and paste this link and load it, and then you'd see this page.
yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, got it. Absolutely. And the way to do that is we still need to set this routing object, and we set the path to be the root path or base path just with a /. Now there's a little bit extra we can do to this. Because as you're kind of pointing out, like our sort of default page is kind of special. And we in fact want to have more stuff happening inside of it. So, routes can have children. And we do this with the children property that's an array. And again, we have more route objects. And so I'm going to now make a route object for the sort of default route for this path. So I'm going to set index to true, and this indicates this is the default route. And then for my element, I'm going to say, let's show the home page. And I have to go ahead and import it. Now, we have to do a little more work here because this isn't very interesting yet. And to make this work, we actually have to use what's called an outlet. Because what I want to be able to do, and what we'll do in just a minute, is I want to be able to have an about page, and other pages, and so on. Now, this component doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to comment this code out so it doesn't break anything. And let's see how we have to modify app.jsx to make this work. And this is where it starts to get a little interesting, because my problem, my challenge now is how can React Router know what page to load inside app, right? Because it's really nice to have sort of a skeleton template, you know, like maybe I just want app to have the header, the nav bar and the footer, and you know, this button stuff. Maybe in fact, I want this button that we have to live inside the home page. So in fact, I'm going to put it there, and we'll just import the use state that we need. So now this counters on the home page. So like if I change the page, I'll see other stuff. And app just really has a title, which we could even get rid of, a nav bar, whatever page I want. And in fact, we'll even get rid of that, and a footer. But how can React Router do this? Well, I need a sort of special escape hatch component. React Router needs an outlet or a place to put the different pages. So I need to import a very special component called outlet from React Router dump. And over here, instead of hard coding in homepage, I use the outlet component. And now something very interesting has happened. Because if we look at this app component, I see that there is no home component here. There's just outlet. Yet here, I still see the home page. And if I look at React DevTools, we have to dig way down. And in fact, here we see the outlet component, and way down inside it, we see a home page, right? And I see all this router provider stuff, but then up here is my app component. Here's the nav bar. Here's this sort of special magical outlet component from React Router DOM. Inside that, React Router is actually rendering the home page, and then we see the footer. So let me build an about page so we can kind of see this in action with another example, and then we'll talk through it and draw some diagrams and stuff. So over here in pages, I'm going to make another page, and we're going to call it about.jsx. And I'm going to do div, and I think we did class name is page, and h2, and we'll say about page, and we'll say this is the about page. And so what I want to be able to have happen is when I'm here at this sort of default route, it shows the home page. But if I go to about, I want to see the about page instead of this error message. So I need to add a new route. So I have to go to my router, and the same way we've added a child route under our app component, under this base route for the whole application, we're going to add one now for the about page. And I'm going to go ahead and import the about component. And now we see that we have the about page. And so if I go to my base route, we see the home page. But now that I've added this child route slash about, and again, this path could be anything I want, the path name. When I put that in the URL bar, it loads the about page. So what's happening now is to make another TL draw diagram. And then I think this will be a good point to pause for questions. If this is my app, it now looks like this. I have my nav bar. And my footer. And this very special outlet component. Right? And React Router DOM is doing something really interesting in here. And inside here, we see different things rendered, right? And so if path is slash, we render home. And the reason is because we set index to true. So it defaults here to this. If path is about, we render the about page component. So I just want to pause here and check in and see what questions people have. What's on people's minds of what might be good to kind of walk through with the code. Tony, yes, sir.
So I originally learned React Router 5, I think it was version 5. So I learned like the switch and things like that. Is this essentially taking over where the switch came in Router 5?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is. There's a couple different ways to create this route object. There's a way to do it with components called declarative routing that is kind of nice. This is just sort of the way we teach it. Because this is a useful, you'll see this style in lots of other React libraries as well. So it is good to see and start to get used to. Bryson, yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you write element, the what you write after element, is that like an exported function from a different file then?
Yeah,
Or is that the file
exactly.
name?
Exactly. That's a great point. So what's happening here is I import this homepage component. And then when I'm writing it like this with the slashes, I'm telling React, hey, render this component. Or I'm passing it as they call it a JSX element or a React element. So that this can get rendered. So I'm importing this, and this is a React component like any other. right? It's a function whose job it is to return stuff to be rendered to the DOM. But then when I want to sort of pass it in a form that's ready to be rendered, I do it this way and I write it as a JSX component, if that makes sense. The same way that we've been doing it when I was doing this manually, for example, like here I'm importing the nav bar and here I'm telling React, hey, render this nav bar component here. Does that help break it down a bit?
That definitely answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. What other questions do folks have? What else are people curious about? Okay, let's maybe build out one more page and then we can take a break. So let's, for fun, let's just build out how about we'll just call it a cat info page, because why not? And so again, I'm going to make a div and we'll say, you know, cat info, and we'll put a paragraph tag here and we'll say like, you know, we're gonna show a cat pic in just a minute. And so now that I've created this page, what do I have to do here in this children array so that in my app, when I go to cats or cat, our cat page will show up. Does anyone want to guide me through that? Well, let me go ahead and take a crack. So for every route, I need to create a React router route object. Right? And in fact, if we search here for out, and we go here to click on it, we see here in the docs, they have a whole breakdown of this route object and how it gets past the different route creation functions. There's a lot more things we'll learn about later with loaders and actions to load data. There's error elements and so on. And they have just a very full description, right? But the key thing is, first of all, path. And this tells React Router when it looks at the value of the URL bar, like what component I should render it for. So I know that my new route object is going to need the path cat. And after path, kind of the next most important, and there's a lot of additional stuff we can do here with nested routes and other things. But the next most important thing is element. And this is the React Elementer component that we're going to render when, as it says, the route matches the URL. Right, and so now I've just added a new route. And so here, we in fact see we've got the cat info page. I've got my about page, and I've got my home page. And again, because I'm using this special React Router component called outlet, React Router, based on this URL, is deciding what component to render inside of it. And we see this outlet component here, and right now it's the home page. And if I go to about, that will change to the about page. And if I go to cat, it'll change to the cat page. And I saw there were one or two hands up. Arnold, yes, sir.
Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. Sorry, I don't know if you covered this, but I was wondering, so for the default for the home, you have to put it in the under the children, because I know that you have like the parent one as the home, the slash one.
Yeah, That's a great question. You don't have to do it this way. The same way where I have like multiple route objects here. I could add, for instance, let's just copy this and let's put it here. And let's see what happens now. Let's change, though I need to change this to something else so it doesn't conflict. So let's see what happened here. And let me move this up to the top, in fact. And this is actually a great question. So remember that in create browser router, I'm passing an array, and that array consists of a bunch of objects, of routing objects. So if I decide that I want like multiple top level routes, I absolutely can do that. And here we see mouse goes to this cat info element. And that's the only thing that I see, right? Because I'm telling the router, hey, when we have this path, this mouse in the URL bar, render this. If I go to my base route, that's just the slash. We're telling React Router, hey, when you go to this path, render our app JSX, right? And app JSX has a nav bar component, it has a footer, and it also has the outlet. And these we don't need anymore. And the reason that we usually won't have multiple top level routes like this is because it's really nice to sort of have this skeleton, right? And in fact, maybe for some reason, maybe I want to see this count in multiple places. Maybe I want to see it in my title. Maybe I want to see it in my nav bar. And let's just put a span here and let count is now passed as a prop. So we'll say count and we'll say count is count. And well, the home page is where it gets a little trickier with passing things into the outlet. So I'm not going to cross that bridge yet because we kind of I have two separate count variables here. So my example got a little mixed up. I got a little ahead of myself. But if we were to kind of maybe pull this out of the home page just for example purposes and put it back in app.jsx, we could put it right there. And so now the point being that I can use this app component as a common template for my whole site. Right. And to go back to this diagram, this is a pretty common layout, right? And in fact, we don't have a sidebar at the moment, but you know, we might want our app to have a sidebar too. That's always there. And so that's why, although I can do multiple top level routes, and sometimes there might be a good reason, like having this one here, but you know, if I go to /mouse, I lose that basic sort of template. Does that help answer your question a bit, Arnold?
Just to clarify, so when you say if there are multiple top levels, so you use that if you have like sidebars and whatnot to keep it separate?
Yeah, and sorry for jumping around a bit there. So other way around. And I realized I jumped through a lot of things there. I don't want multiple top levels because what I really want is I want to use this app component as like my sort of master template. that all my pages sit inside. So if I want to have a nav bar that shows up on every page and a footer that shows up on every page and some component state that I can pass into different pages and child components, I want all that stuff in the app component, and then I kind of want to render each page inside of the app component. And so that's why what we have over here is there's just this one top level route and it renders app, but we can do what's called nested or child routes with these other ones. So for example, if I change this path to foo, just for fun, well, now my app renders at, it should render at foo. Maybe I need the trailing slash here. Let's see. I wonder if dev server absolute path route about nested under path foo is not solid. So this is a different issue where I actually don't want this slash up front. So that was actually my bad, and that is a bit of a gotcha. With the slash makes it an absolute path from the host name. So by having this path be whatever I want, and just to use foo as an example here, I could do foo slash about to go to the about page, or foo slash cat to go to the cat info page. But if I just go to plain foo, because over here I've set this index property to true, we render the home page. But by convention, what we do is the app component lives on the path that's just slash, that's called the base path. Because, you know, if you go to a website, that's what you would expect to see for the homepage URL. Does that help break it down a bit?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Great question. What other questions do folks have, or what else is on people's minds? All right, awesome. Why don't let's take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to dive more into this. We've already seen a bit about child pages. We'll see how to add a nav bar with Bootstrap and use links. And we'll see how to add some error pages. And let me go ahead and stop our recording.